Confident Defense Podcast. And welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Connor, and every week we sit down with VCs, CEOs, and security executives to have really honest conversations about how to navigate and win this infinite game of cybersecurity. So today we've got our co-host with us, Stefan. Stefan, it is awesome to have you on the show.
Always glad to be here, Connor. Let's get going.
And Paul, thank you so much for being our guest today. I've been really excited to have you on the show. As the CEO of WhiteCanyon, you guys build this software, predominantly WipeDrive, but others that provide secure, easy data deletion for IT technology. So anything that holds data and plugs into a wall, you guys have the ability to do secure data erasure, removal. So just thank you for joining the show today.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Stefan. Appreciate you guys having me here on the Confidence Defense Podcast. And I'm excited to talk about data security.
So the impetus for our conversation is we got introduced and I started to understand what you guys are doing over at WipeDrive. And I realized the power and of the risks that come with it when we don't complete the life cycle of data protection, which is part of data destruction. And then, of course, Stefan brought up the great conversation off camera here about forensically checking disks. So I think there's no better story to kick off the importance of why we need to have data destruction, secure data destruction and deletion than this anecdote you were sharing. So Stefan, do you want to bring the audience up to speed on that?
Absolutely. So for me, this is kind of a fun story, but it really highlights the reason that we're doing this. So a good friend of mine teaches forensics at the collegiate level. And one of their exercises that they do is they go out and they buy secondhand drives from anywhere on the internet that they can find them. And then they bring those in and hand them off to students to do real world forensics on the drives to try to recover files, understand what the company may have been using them for. Have they really been erased? There's a whole set and a whole slew of questions that they try to answer around this problem set. And very quickly into this friend of mine, can't say his name, Chatham House Rules, what he realized was he has to go do forensics on the disks first before he gives it to his students, because his students were finding illicit material that he then had to go report, and they had to sign like waivers and information and like be interviewed and chain of custody and the whole deal. He had to do that first. So kind of how do we prevent kids from college students from not seeing something they're not supposed to, and translate that to the rest of the business who, for legitimate businesses, may have exposed their information unknowingly and either given a competitor an advantage that they shouldn't have, or expose themselves to criminal partners and criminal parties that could then use that in some other potentially punitive way. So that's kind of the fun story that I wanted to share. And Paul, tell us about kind of the thought process for going down this route.
Sure. So, I hate to tell you this, but that happens all the time. That's the fact that he has to do that. I'm not surprised by that one bit. We did a little study here a couple months ago. We bought 25 drives off eBay. 13 of them had personal or company identifying information on there. And some of them were law firms in California. And one of them was the Israeli government, or an agency in the Israeli government. So erasing data, erasing all your information from these drives is something that everyone knows that they should do, but it's not really implemented correctly, or there's little kind of failures in that process, and these devices get out with all that information on there.
So I guess this really just comes back to why is this not happening? Why is this not just upfront in the same way we think about throwing antivirus on the machine to stop there from being malware? Why is this getting left out? Why is an industry we're not putting this top of mind?
Great question. First off, it's a cost. Okay, erasing your drive or securely erasing the data from there is a cost. There's no real kind of benefit or profit margin there. It's a cost. And also at end of life, there's kind of this unknown kind of chain of custody really in most organizations where you say, hey, let's give it to the ITAD or back to the leaser. Who's in charge of the data? Who's responsible for it? This has all kind of been a gray area for the past. Data erasure has been around for 40, 50 years. It's nothing new. It's not sexy. It's just one of those areas that has popped up as people have been able to kind of forensically recover this data and then the financial penalties that have come from HIPAA and from GDPR, those have caused kind of a focus on this area that's been around for ages. I mean, here at WhiteCanyon Software, we've been in business with WipeDrive since 1998. So data erasure is nothing new, but the idea is who's responsible? How do you know they did it?
Yeah.
All that's kind of, in most organizations, kind of an unknown. And that's why we're kind of here to say, hey, you guys need to really formalize your process. You need to improve it and make sure that data is securely gone way before that drive can get into someone's hands.
You know, because I'm right there with you, because I think about it like my own experience in organizations I've worked in where this was largely viewed as like an IT problem. It was just like, so cybersecurity is up front, stopping it from happening, but then we store all this drives. I remember like reading some articles, like the hard drives that go into printer copier scanners, right? And people are scanning all these sensitive documents. Well, that scanner takes that image and drops it to a hard drive and then prints it off. And then they were recycling these. And then you had, again, these hard drives with all this sensitive data on it. And it was like sometimes the most sensitive information because it was stuff they thought was completely internal. And my experience of this was just that it was like left up to the e-recyclers to send back a certificate telling the company that the data had been securely deleted. So it sounds like that's not always happening.
So that happened back in 2011, and that was a whole copier debacle. All of a sudden, this kind of came out, hey, there's drives inside your copier. And everyone that had a copier stopped and said, really? There's drives in there? And you can literally just open up a plastic flap with a screwdriver, pull out this drive, do a little forensic recovery on there, and every single paper that you scanned or photocopied was on that drive. And you can imagine that for hospitals, large organizations. And these copiers all left these facilities over the last 7-8 years. So they're out there in the wild. And that was a big, like you said, a big debacle. It just was a big headache. And that goes back to like, where's your data stored? Who has access to your data? And how do you manage that data and make sure it's securely gone before it leaves your facility?
So I know there's like a lot of standards out there, and mostly people go home to the NIST standard on this.
Sure.
But you were talking in our off camera here that when most people think about secure deletion of their data, they're like, hey, we're just going to write over it with ones and zeros and like we're good. We do a 000 bypass all over the disks and we're all done. But it sounds like, that was that protocol is 15, 20 years old. We've moved on from that. So like, how do you get your hands around this? How do we start thinking about data deletion? Like, what are the tools, techniques we need to be incorporating into it and fitting it back into our life cycle?
Sure. So there is a cat and mouse game with technology, and that's in every kind of industry and every type of application or software out there. For data erasure and WipeDrive, what it is all the hardware that's being used to store data, it keeps changing. So previously it used to be just hard drive, platter-based devices, right? And the zeros and ones was great. Then they came out with DCOs and other areas on the drive that you had to be able to access. And some of the free tools and open source tools couldn't access those areas. And so the paid tools like ourselves and our competitors could, and that's kind of where we popped up and we became kind of important because of that. Since then, we've had SSDs come out, NVMe drives. These all use different types of storage architecture to store all this information. And flash media, flash memory, all these kind of different components change how you can access and address them. And so that's where WhiteDrive stepped up even further, saying, hey, we got to be able to address these properly. NIST came out with new compliant regulations saying, hey, the DoD3, the Gutman, 13, all these different override patterns are out of date. This is what you need to do going forward. And they did a great job of kind of compiling that, publishing that back in 2018. And that's been the standard for the last 3 or 4 years. And going forward, it'll continue to change. The data bearing devices out there will continue to change with the technology, and you'll have to address it appropriately depending on the device is pretty much what's going to happen.
So, let's see, about 20 years ago-ish, as an intern, part of my job was getting rid of data. And that was, the old chemistry lab goggles and a sledgehammer and pulling out drives and, waiting until the cameras were off and then erasing data.
Yeah.
So, obviously that's not, there's not a great ROI on that anymore because it takes manpower, it takes labor. There's other costs involved, and you're looking at like liability for people that might be injuring themselves with sledgehammers. And then you can't also go out and sell those sell those drives again. And there's a life cycle here around your data, obviously. So maybe walk us through what some of that secure deletion looks like, but like maybe how long it takes. Like what's kind of the ROI of bringing in somebody like you, or maybe even your competitors? What's the benefit on that market?
Over the sledgehammer or the drill technique.
I like the drill technique. That was mine.
Yeah, I like the reference to workers' comp. Like, you're letting them drill, but who knows? You're having an IT guy drill something. It can go. Anything could go sideways on that.
When I started, towers didn't have folded edges, so you had to wear gloves sometimes because you would slice your hands open, and motherboards don't work well if there's blood on them. Sorry for anybody that's squeamish. It's not a problem anymore.
You'd be surprised how many people still do that with their drives. They take them out back with a sledgehammer or a drill, and they physically destroy them. There's a bunch of physical shredders out there that are still used to throw drives in and shred them. One thing you didn't bring up on that kind of list of issues with it is the e-waste. As far as sustainability and e-waste and landfills, all these devices you shred or destroy, they're just going to go there. Maybe you recycle some of the components of it, some of the precious metals and some, the other parts of it, but there's still chips and, the electronic board on there that's going to just go right into the landfill. So what we say on our side here is, it is something you need to address as an organization. A lot of the large organizations have addressed it in some manner or form as far as, erasing the devices rather than physically shredding them. One issue that comes up with that physical destruction is the chain of custody. And who do you have as far as the report goes saying that all the data got destroyed? On our side, what we say is if you want to do both, if you want to securely erase it, you get that digital certificate saying, hey, it was erased on this date and time. Here's the sectors we addressed. All the information's gone. You're all set. After that, if you want to shred it because you're worried about that data getting out there, that's great. Well, not great. That's kind of an internal choice. But if you want to donate it to a charity, if you want to resell it, you mentioned resale value. These devices are going for $10 to $80 each on the used market. If you're destroying 1,000 a year, that's some good revenue or potential cost you can kind of recover for your IT department. So there's lots of different components on the physical destruction that has a lot of issues. I like the focus that's going on right now for the kind of the environmental aspect and the sustainability aspect. Europe is leading the way on that. I think the U.S. isn't too far behind, saying, hey, let's look at all the waste we generate and let's try and minimize that as best as possible. And I think that's going to continue to be a focus, both on the corporate side, but also on the federal government side and state government side as we try to kind of minimize our impact, our physical impact on the earth.
Now that is something to be thankful for. I mean, I think it's great that we can actually have something in cybersecurity where we can do a benefit or at least a significant harm reduction. We could say, okay, we can be better stewards of the technology that we have. So going back to like the data component of this, I'm curious your thoughts and your experience around this, because I know that when GDPR came, it really led the way. CCPA and others have followed, but part of that life cycle is that secure data deletion. And there's that sense of like, if a customer comes in and says, I want you to delete my data, but it's living on a laptop, which you e-recycled 3 weeks ago, there's no way you're getting back that laptop. You need to ensure that it was deleted on the way out. So can you talk to me like where the privacy implications, where does GDPR and CCPA fit into this universe? And is that impacting how people are talking about data destruction?
Sure. So the regulations have provided a focus for IT managers to kind of address how data is managed at end of life because of the financial implications. HIPAA and GDPR being the leaders there. CCPA, the California Data Protection Law, doesn't really have too much teeth as far as the data getting out there. Not too much compared to GDPR and HIPAA. But those other two have kind of driven organizations to say, hey, we need to address this properly. How are we going to do it? let's take a look at this end of life process and how we can manage it. And that's been kind of the focus we've seen. And we've seen Colorado's about to ratify their own data privacy law that almost matches California. Virginia has one that's similar. And talking with our representatives in Congress, the federal data privacy law is probably going to come out in the next 3 or 4 years. It has to match California's because that's the strictest in the nation. It's going to be nowhere near GDPR as far as financial penalties and the liabilities on that side. And personally, I don't think it really addresses in-depth consumer data to the level that GDPR does. I think it'll be a nice kind of, hey, here are some minimums you have to reach as far as an organization goes. But there's more here that needs to be done. The idea that your data can not be handled correctly by an organization and gets out there onto the internet, and once it's on the internet, it's there for good, is very dangerous. Once your children's information gets out there on the internet, it's there for good for their whole life, as far as, social security numbers and other items like that, date of birth. So there's a real issue here that we don't really see, and we aren't going to see for 5 or 10 years, maybe even 20 years, where we look back and go, oh, if only we'd done something more back in the 20s, we wouldn't have these issues now. What are we going to do now? And we have to address it then. So on my side, I wish the regulation would step up, put more financial teeth in it, make organizations terrified of that data getting out. Therefore, they put in the implementations and protocols to protect it properly for all of us. You and I, the regular consumer, whoever you are, and that way we can avoid any mischief or having to plug a hole later on. Let's try and fix it now before we get to that point.
So, go ahead, Stefan.
Well, so we talked about some drives and the risk of that getting out, and we've been talking physical drives so far that are within our own environment. But as I think about where many of our clients are putting their data, it's not in co-location, or it's not on site anymore. Obviously, we switch to the cloud in a lot of different ways, and with that shared responsibility of our cloud providers running that infrastructure for us. How does secure delete, just as a concept, fit into that if it is on their on shared infrastructure? Do we, as practitioners, still get certification that that data has really been deleted?
Great question. I mean, first off, with cloud computing, everyone's storing everything on the cloud. It's a great way to manage your data and access it anywhere, which with the remote workforce and COVID and all of us working wherever we are, that's became a huge plus and a huge benefit. But you're exactly right. It brought up a huge issue, which is how do you ensure that your cloud service providers are erasing their drives correctly? And so AWS, Microsoft, all these large providers, they're going to manage those devices correctly. I can even say, in the data centers, they've recently approved wiping SSDs in those data centers, which is brand new. Previously, they're all shredded. So imagine for the last 8-10 years, these expensive SSDs being shredded in these data centers. So there is kind of progress on the technology aspect of erasing these devices. The cloud providers that do provide this service, they're responsible. They've backed up your data in many different servers all over the world, different locations, you name it. But each of these data centers are kind of locked down, and they protect your information before they go out. Now, as an organization, if you're doing it yourself, that's where you have to be careful. If you're having you have a couple different data centers yourself, how do you manage that information? Who has access to it? Typical data center issues, you have to address those as an organization and ensure that that data is protected as well. So yeah, cloud's here to stay. It'll be here for good. So.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I completely see that. And it's really great to hear that there's advances in technology because I didn't even think about that, just not my thing to think about, like these cloud providers, 8 to 10 years, all of them, all over the world, constantly shredding, creating all of that waste. And you're like, great, I'm glad we're, again, solving the problem. We needed to do it for data security, but we have a more sophisticated approach now to solving this problem.
Yeah. It's a huge e-waste, huge just the cost too. I mean, imagine the millions of dollars are just going down the drain when you shred these devices, and they could be resold and reused. But they're on their side, they have to be very careful. They have to be very pragmatic. Let's make sure that all that data is gone. And they've gone through that process. And okay, erasure does work on these SSDs. Let's apply it, and then we can reuse it in our organization and other aspects, or resell it, return it to the manufacturer, whatever we need to do on our side. So it's great. We're headed towards a good place.
So we definitely can expect lower cloud costs coming up, is what I'm hearing.
I don't know if that's up to them. I don't know if they're going to do that, but it's a nice plus as far as sustainability. All these larger organizations are worried about sustainability reports on their financial documents, so that's a big push, big plus. And so we're headed there as far as the other Fortune 100, Fortune 500. That's where we're going as an industry and a nation, and I think that's great. We're going into a good place.
So what are your thoughts around, I'm sure you get called into a lot of conversations around just general data security, as you have these executives who are asking you, these IT executives come in and help solve what is a large problem for them, whether the driver be the e-waste or the driver be just data security. Have you been in those conversations with IT and been able to help them navigate the whole life cycle of data protection? And if so, kind of what are your thoughts around data protection as it comes to ransomware? I know it's not exactly in your company, but
sure.
You're definitely involved in those conversations.
Yeah, that's a hot button issue right now. I mean, ransomware is attacking not only state organizations, local organizations, but on the federal side and also corporations as well. And with the ability to be paid during, through Bitcoin or other means, there's actually a possibility you can get away with those funds, which has never really been the case before. They kind of track you down through banks or cash, payments, things like that. So ransomware is growing as far as the headache goes. And the more organizations that are paying these ransoms, the more attacks we're going to keep seeing. And so it's going to spiral. I don't know if it's going to spiral out of control, but it's going to continue to get worse and worse. On the data protection side, we talk with IT leaders every day about their data, where they store it, how do they store it, how do you address it? And most organizations have come up with a data protection officer position, whose sole responsibility is know where the data is at, who has access to it, and what happens to the data through the whole IT lifecycle. So we address that with organizations. I'm happy to sit down and discuss it with anyone that's interested on this podcast or listening to your audience that's listening to this podcast. We have a great team here that's been doing this for 23 years. So we've seen everything you come up across. It is a nightmare, but it's a nightmare that can be addressed and fixed appropriately. And also, just a quick note, with all these remote workers, a big headache that's come up on our side is these remote workers go out and they're connecting to your network and downloading files to their personal computer if they haven't been, assigned a work laptop. And that's a big headache we're seeing on our side of saying, hey, what do I do? All my data is now on a employee's home laptop. Do I have the ability to tell them to erase it or return that computer to us to process? There's lots of headaches in the data side, and there's a lot of focus to try and protect and minimize the liability, which is great.
That's awesome. Do you guys, how does that mechanism work with WipeDrive and your technology? Is it an agent that gets installed and you say securely delete these files? Is it just kind of to take the whole drive off? How does that mechanically work?
Yeah. So we've been doing this for 23 years. So we have all sorts of deployments. I mean, we have, individual deployments where you can push it out through Active Directory or any other service and erase that specific device wherever it's at. We have callbacks so that if that device, let's say, leaves your organization or doesn't check in, it's going to erase itself the next time it's turned on. And it'll have a nice Windows screen that spins. The person booting it thinks, oh, it's taking a while, it's going to update, and we're erasing all the data on that device to make sure that it's all gone. And with cloud computing, there's less risk there because most employees are told to save their data to the cloud, so there's not too big of a risk of losing information. We also have other deployments that erase high volumes of devices at the same time. So you could have 100 computers on a workbench and just push them through and erase 10,000 devices a year. So we've done all these deployments for a long time. If you have any questions on it, come talk to us. We can help fit it exactly to how you want to manage your data and erase your data and give you the deployment that fits for you as well.
I saw you guys just released the Prime tool, which gives you the certificate of deletion unless a QR code. Is that right?
Yes.
How does that work?
Yes.
That looks really cool.
Yeah, so WipeDrive Prime kind of came from the issue here with COVID, which is, we're assigning all these laptops, and then how do we process these devices and know that all the data is gone when this laptop moves from facility to facility and into storage and then back to the leaser? How do we make sure that all the data is gone? So what we've done on WipeDrive is you erase that computer laptop. It securely deletes all the data on all the drives internally. Then it provides a bootable report that when you turn on that computer, it pops up a QR code. Pull out your phone, you scan it, takes you to a website that shows you that all the data on that computer has been erased. So anywhere it goes through on that chain of custody or that IT lifecycle locations, you can double check and make sure all that data is gone.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's super sophisticated.
It's been super, super popular with our clients. So we're very excited about it. It's been really good.
Well, I wanted to shift the thought process a little bit, and taking a look at your background, you went from like a technical support manager all the way to being a CEO, and effectively of a security company. So
Sure.
first off, could you just kind of walk us through that for anybody that might be their target? They could have a couple lessons learned from you.
Yeah, it was kind of unusual circumstances for myself. I finished my MBA. I was working at a couple jobs, and I was looking for a position back in '08 after the big crash. Okay, so I was up for any job that came down or around me, anything I can find. And there was a tech support position here at WhiteCanyon Software back in '08. I took it. It was 40 hours a week, paid $12 an hour, and I said, "Hey, this is great. I'll do this for a while." And I loved it. Just the data security aspect, the environmental aspect. It just was so kind of compelling on my side. And we're in such a great niche that there's only 3 or 4 paid players. There's a bunch of open source tools, but we get calls from the biggest clients in the world. I mean, Fortune 50 companies, 44 of the Fortune 100 use us right now. So we'd get these calls from these large clients, work with them on their data, how they want to erase it, the deployments. So just the ability to interact on just kind of a personal basis with these companies was great. So moved up to technical support manager, did that for probably 2.5 years. Got tired of that, and they said, "Hey, you want to move into sales?" And I said, "No, thank you. Like, I don't want to go into sales. I'm not a kind of greasy salesperson type. I'm not good at that. I like to just
as technicians and engineers over the years and years and years. There is this conflict between the two.
Yeah. And luckily the consultative sell has kind of kicked in back in 2010, 2011, which you're kind of talking with clients and helping them through it and helping them purchase it without that kind of, I don't want to say sleazy. It sounds like it's such a terrible word, but because salespeople are very important to any organization, but it just fit really perfectly. And I moved into sales for the next 6 years. And then I left WhiteCanyon for a couple years to kind of get my experience elsewhere. And I have my MBA, and they had an executive change, and they said, "Hey, Paul, you're great here. You're here for almost a decade. You want to come back, run the company?" And I think anyone in my shoes would jump at it and say, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Let's kind of attack this 2021 kind of era, back then 2018 kind of idea of the internet and how things are sold, and let's try and push this company." So came back 3.5 years ago. It's been great. Just looking at digital transformation, WipeDrive Prime as a new kind of resource for our clients, but kind of just getting ahead of issues that are coming up. Right now, IoT devices, do they store your data? Do you need to erase it? What data is on there? Do even the manufacturers know what's data on there? So we're trying to look ahead 5 years, address those issues before they come up for our clients has kind of been my focus. And it's been really fun, really fun.
That's awesome. I'm going to drill down just one more layer here, because it sounds like there's kind of 4 decision points that we've talked about. One was, going from the technical side to the sales side. One was, potentially growing somewhere else, and then, coming back in as the third one as the CEO role. And then in that role now, trying to decide where to take the company next. So of those 4 big decision points, which one has been the biggest struggle for you of those? And I know I'm causing you to reflect back on that, but let's dive into it a little bit more, and then what would the advice be for anybody else that's about to go through one of those decision points?
Oh, I mean, each one of those is it's hard to kind of grade them against each other because you're trying to adjust to a new situation. Going from technical to sales was really great because I had a technical background. And on the sales side, you're dealing mostly on the IT area with someone with 15, 20 years in the IT industry. And so they want to talk to someone that they can kind of talk and understand who they're dealing with and the technology behind it. So that was a really good fit there. It wasn't too hard of a struggle going through that. As far as taking over the CEO role, that wasn't too hard of a transition. We have a great team here. I worked with them for 10 years, so they kind of like welcome me back, say, hey, this is great. Come on back, let's do this together. As far as leaving an organization, I 100% recommend it to anyone out there. If you're with an organization for 5, 8 years, go out there and see what else is out there. And when you go out there, for myself, I was gone for about 2 years, went through 2 different companies while I was gone. And it was great just to first off network with other people in the industry, but also see how other software companies sold software and learn from them, from their experience, apply what I knew and what I'd done for the past 6 years and kind of see how that's done. And your understanding of how IT software sales goes or enterprise software sales, the process through it, just for me went through the roof. And I could really understand what the best methods are, what they aren't, how the industry does it. And you don't really get that insight until you move through different organizations. And I'm not saying jump through organizations every year. That looks really bad on your resume. Don't do that. But go out there and see what else is out there, get experience on that. And I've networked and made new friends doing that I wouldn't have bumped into without. So it's been great on my side.
Absolutely, and for anybody that is interested in making that shift to security sales, what I always recommend doing is going through and studying the fundamentals of enterprise sales and like you were saying, the consultative approach is because it is about finding solutions, and the enterprise aspect of it of you have to go out and you have to engage many different disparate stakeholders to get to yes.
Yeah.
And it's usually not easy. I mean, maybe for you it is. And
no. It's complex for everyone. The methods have changed. Nowadays they want to see you implement it. They want to kick the tires. They want to see it works. Whereas before it was very much like trust the word of mouth, or you say it works, we'll buy it. It arrives, and you say, okay, let's open it up and run it. And then that's when all the headaches happen. Those days are kind of gone. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. More than that, probably 75% is like making sure it works pre-PO. So you're actually making sure the software works exactly how they need it. And then they sign off on it with the final decision maker saying, okay, this works. Let's go. Let's purchase and move on. So it's great for the purchasing clients. They have a better method of doing it now, and ensuring that they don't purchase a tool that they don't use. But it's also on the vendor side, you're doing more work, and you actually have to have a better tool so that you avoid those headaches, and the buying process is faster and simpler. So I think it makes better tools overall, as far as that kind of new way of doing it.
What I like about this, though, is just to see you as a security company really leaning into the innovation, right? Really leaning into, there's a change happening here. There's a change in the way we store and handle data. There's a change in what customer expectations are. There's a change in what the enterprise standards are. And I just see this sometimes where like you get companies and they own their niche and like they get successful and then they get complacent and they don't innovate and they don't keep moving. But I just take 10 seconds looking at your site and LinkedIn and following this, and they're like, wow, there's a lot of innovation still coming out of this very particular problem set.
And you smile anytime Connor says innovation.
Which I think is a great thing in a CEO. So
that's why I'm in software. That's why I'm in technology. I love the next thing. I love what's coming up. I love the future aspect of it. That's where we're headed. And if you haven't wrapped your mind around that, you're going to bump into it over and over and over again. You're always going to be behind. And it comes from experience. On our side, back in 2014, all of a sudden we started getting a flood of calls saying, hey, can you erase mobile devices? And the issue is all these iPhones and Androids started to hit the market, 2 or 3 years after they got purchased in high volume. And all of a sudden our clients and others were saying, hey, they want to upgrade and buy another device. Can you erase this old one? And as an organization, it was like, oh, wow, we have to jump on board and get these all erased. And so that was a big learning lesson for us, saying, hey, any new technology that comes out, if there's memory on there, we have to learn how to erase it and get ready for it in the future. And it's from hard knocks. It's not just, a great idea. It's from, having to learn that.
But I mean, that's a pretty simple but powerful mission statement. That thing, if it has memory, if there's long-term memory, then you guys are going to be there to understand how you clean it up after the fact and how we do secure data deletion. So that's a pretty high bar to set for yourselves.
Well, a lot of organizations, just the way that data is stored nowadays, flash memory could be anywhere. I mean, TVs are getting it now. It's all over the place. All these, Google Home and other devices have it. So the clients we work with, they call it data-bearing devices. I mean, it's literally going to be anything you have. Fitbits, Apple Watches, you name it. It's going to have memory. It has memory. And pretty soon, I mean, you have washers, dryers, you have, fridges. It's spreading everywhere. What do you need to erase? What needs to be, properly sanitized? And it's going to grow and get more prevalent, I guess is the right way to say it.
It'll be interesting to see how the future of this industry shakes out, because you can see with these this long-term data storage happening, as you mentioned, like on your watch, on your scale, on the IoT devices baked into your fridge and washer and dryer. Like, where did the manufacturers come in? Like, where's their responsibility on this? Like, them to create the object, secure the object, and have proper deletion versus the average home consumer. So I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts on where the industry is going in that space?
Well, I mean, the industry as a whole has to address it. Most industries haven't. I mean, SSDs came out, and there were protocols set up to securely erase SSDs, and none of the manufacturers were following them. So back in 2016, UCSD did a great report where they got all these SSDs, ran the protocols on them, and the data was still there. And it was a big black eye for the organizations out there, the manufacturers, everyone going, oh, wait a second, the protocols we've told you to implement, you aren't implementing correctly, and there's still data on these devices that we ran your protocols to erase everything. So it became a huge headache. Now you talk to the fridge manufacturers, I mean, they've never dealt with software in their devices before. This is brand new for them as an industry. They're behind the times on what they need to do in order to erase this data. Should it be erased? So there is this kind of new product life cycle where it comes out and then the headaches happen later. And hopefully these industries address it. And I don't think they'll be there yet. We'll see in the future, but it's out there. It's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better, unfortunately.
Okay. So I got one final question for you before we wrap up here. If you could sit down with all the IT security leaders in the US and just have like a big megaphone conference, they're like, do this one thing. Like, here is the innovation that you are missing out on. Here is the practice that you want these folks to be implementing. What would you encourage them to do? What would be the advice to the IT leaders and the security leaders out there?
Let's see. There's so many pieces of advice I'd love to shout out. If I could just say one, it is protect your data now, even if you don't see the value in it. Anywhere from the minute the data gets into your organization to the minute it leaves, spend whatever it takes to protect that data. Because on our side, when that device gets out, okay, let's say it leaves your facility now, and who knows, maybe it goes into a storage unit, who knows, someone purchases it, sticks it somewhere, 10 years from now that data gets out, and there's going to be a financial penalty later with regulation. So you're going to be exposed later to your performance right now. Protect your data wherever it's at. Go through the steps to hire the appropriate personnel to manage it, implement the protocols, everything across the board, because you're going to be avoiding major headaches, major financial liabilities in the future if you don't do that right now.
That's a great why. That is a great why.
Yeah, I think
it's you're setting a bomb now that's going to go off later. You're not even aware that you're doing that, and later on the financial penalties will be there, and you're going to expose yourself to it. So you got to do it now, even if it's expensive, it's a headache. You don't really see the reason why. You have to do it now.
Man, I couldn't agree more. I think that is both sober and chilling at the same time. It's like,
I'm sorry.
Now it's bad. I just think it's
very chilling. I'm sorry. I hate to be so negative, but yes, it is.
But you're right. You're right.
It's
that
a
is
time bomb, I guess is the right word for it. It's a time bomb for later, and you have to address it.
And you're right. With the sea change that's going on in data privacy, from a privacy perspective, and we are seeing retroactive policies coming out now, this is a thing that will continue forward. So with that, Paul, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. It's great to see yet another company really pushing the boundaries on innovation in security. So thank you for coming to the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Connor. Thank you, Stefan. Thanks for having me on here, and I appreciate the chance to talk with your audience at the Confident Defense podcast, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Absolutely. And one last thing for everyone who is listening here, please head over to WhiteCanyon.com. Take a look at the WipeDrive software. It is top tier in what it does. And keep your eyes open. By the time we drop this, there will be a Reddit forum out there for all of us so we can connect with the community out there on data protection. Again, Paul, thank you so much for all this.
Yeah, thank you, Connor. Appreciate it. Everyone have a great